The Pit and the Pendulum up for discussion today by none other than Edgar Allan Poe.
Are you the Pit or are you the Pendulum?
I am the Poe, is what I am.
Oh, I see what you did there.
So we're going to walk through this story today and talk about its hidden meanings, and I have a prediction that I think I know what your interpretation is. We like playing the interpretation game here. I think I know what yours is. Just give me a yes or no. Did you go the religious route with this one?
Come on, you know. Of course I did.
Okay.
I'm predictable, if anything.
So I've got a different one for you, so I think we can kind of bounce some ideas back and forth here about different ways of looking at it, which is what our channel's all about, right? Just looking at literature in different ways. So this is a story where we open up with a narrator overhearing his sentence to death, right? And their lips have a stern contempt of human torture. Could have fooled me, just saying. And the narrator sees like these 7 candles appear. They kind of look like white angels, and then they become, quote, meaningless specters. Go ahead and hit me. I know you want to say it. Just start with your interpretation. Where are you going with this one?
Oh, well, obviously there's so much symbolism throughout the whole story of 7 deadly sins. There's the apocalypse, the horsemen, the death and torment and torture. You're eternally damned. Pick and choose. It's all over the place.
Well, I'll tell you this. It's very surreal. It felt like a man was condemned and he's put into this cell, which I don't know, what is it? Is it purgatory? Is it hell? Is the pit hell? You know, like what does it mean that he gets bread and water? There's a lot of symbolism here that I think we can kind of explore. But another way to look at this is perhaps you'll notice the next part, he starts coming in and out of consciousness. He calls it the swoon, if you will. And it's this dreamlike experience where he talks about first the spirit returns to the body and then the body. Right? And if you're aware and awake through that first part, then you have more knowledge and such. That another way to look at this is kind of like a dive into madness that Poe is very well known for, where, you know, the fact that he's condemned, we don't know what his crime was. We don't really know who's condemning him. They say, you know, inquisitors, so it's kind of implying this Catholic Inquisition, you know, which has the religious tone to it as well. But the fact that the man has this lack of knowledge or care for what he's done wrong, like he doesn't feel guilt, it makes me wonder a little bit more about the conscious and unconscious experience. And is he kind of like one of those people that is suppressing perhaps some evil in his life?
As a reader, I love how Poe takes you and puts you in that position. Most of us could probably relate to this unknown fear. We don't know what happens after death. The narrator is unsure why he's being punished. He's unsure who his punishers are. And I think that adds to this suspense, this fearfulness as you, the reader, relating to the narrator and go through the story with him. That knowledge is key. And I think that if you have the knowledge, you would have better understanding, and then you would have maybe access to salvation. And I think that's where I go kind of the religious route, that if this narrator had the knowledge of religion, he could achieve salvation.
There's something to be said about how he wants death, right? And if he did have religion by his side, I think we would have that conversation of salvation. But since he doesn't have it, what's that mean? And, you know, you always hear about how humans have this biological desire to thrive, to multiply, to move forth. And I think that's even a command in the Bible too, right? What does it mean when someone wants to rest, right? He even says that death would be a rest, because there's something to be said about, it's kind of a controversial subject. It's been debated hotly ever since it was proposed, and a couple of people have picked this up and tried to be the champion for it. But have you ever heard of the death drive?
The death drive? No,
Yeah.
do tell.
Yeah, well, it again, a controversial name when you bring it up, but Freud originally proposed it, picked up by Lycan and others down the road. But think of it this way: if life was as simple as we seek pleasure, avoid pain, what would be the evolutionary purpose of having to relive trauma? Right now, in like a Christian interpretation of it, the idea of guilt is meant to be kind of like perhaps like that push towards choosing better options or to come clean and confess perhaps. But let's say you aren't taking that route and you're just like, okay, I had this traumatic experience. Why do I constantly dream about it? Why do I return to it? What's the advantage of that? And even like with the way that some people, like right before they get success, like, you've probably heard of the term like self-sabotage, where they just mess things up.
That was literally popping in my head. Yeah.
So a lot of psychologists kind of start to wonder, are there more forces at play than just pleasure seeking? And one of them is the death drive. The idea of not necessarily seeking death, but in terms of resetting, almost a search for nothing. I think you probably hear from a philosophy standpoint, nihilism, like that life is meaningless. Well, there's also this idea that you can return to nothingness. And that return to nothingness is a creativity moment. It allows you to restart, to retry almost. And it's like that purpose of not achieving something to allow someone to kind of restart in a sense. So to me, I was wondering, why does this man not remember what he did wrong? And why is he searching for the nothingness, the rest, right? To me, he was almost trying to seek a restart in his life, I kind of felt like.
Yeah, I kind of like that theory. Definitely takes it a different route than the religious one that, of course, I went to. I think about that as you said this. As we go through the story, and we can discuss a little bit more of that as we go through, I think about, well, the narrator maybe hasn't given up. I also think about it in the fact that he does try to survive and live as he's being tortured, or there are these death devices that are trying to kill him in one way or another. He eludes them. He doesn't necessarily want to die, or at least he wants to die on his own terms and not theirs. So there is something to be said about that. But also the fact that, me, I take this very literally sometimes. If he has been captured and maybe beaten and he's unconscious or semi-conscious, the dude probably got a concussion, and who knows what that could do to your memory. I don't know if he is purposely forgetting his past, quote, sins, maybe, as I look at it from a religious standpoint. But it's definitely something I think to discuss of what is the drive for death or the drive away from death. And I think that is a good point that I took away from the story that Poe was kind of speaking to me of. What does force us to look at our own life, look at our own death, and the choices that we make for one or the other? The pit or the pendulum.
It's kind of like, regardless of who you are, whether you what you believe in the afterlife, you've got this little bar underneath, your character, your person, you, and there's like a little bar that's just constantly going down, no matter what. Like, you're not living forever. Like, as you're watching this video, your bar is going down.
So dark,
right? Well, but isn't that kind of what this man experiences as he's looking at this pendulum swinging down towards him? Right? There's an inevitability of death is coming towards you. Right? And the actions that you take, are you going to regret them or are you going to embrace them at the end? Because the only way he's going to get out of this, okay, well, he does come up with actually a really creative way. Like, he's strapped down on this wooden board, right? And there's rats everywhere coming out of potentially this well. I'm not sure. But when we look at this well, I would have thought you would have said that well represented hell and this cell was purgatory. Right, he's burning off of his sins right now is kind of how I viewed it. Because when you look at like the biblical description of, like, I mean, it uses the term hell. Like, hell exists, well, Sheol translated. A way you can translate that is hell in the Bible. And it's described as flames, which, is very common depiction in art, but it's also described as eternal darkness. Right, which means when life is over, are you going to be tortured or are you going to is it just the end? You don't get eternal life. And I kind of viewed that pit from a religious standpoint as him moving into that eternal death, the eternal sleep that he won't return from. And these sins, purgatory, the rats coming to eat him to burn off the sin. But then he comes up with like this, he comes up with a really creative way, like with the rats to bite the bandages so that he can kind of escape. It is so unlike Poe because, well, first of all, continuing down the hell thought, right? Like, the walls start caving in on the man and they're burning hot. Like, okay, we're burning. This is the eternal, this is the flames conversation of hell, pushing him towards that eternal darkness. And then, unlike usual Poe fashion, there's like this flip at the end where he's like he's rescued. Like we got trumpets blaring, General LaSalle shows up. Like what's going on here?
He's saved. And I think that this is something that really hits home on the religious standpoint, is that, yes, God will give you the tools, but you have to use them in order to almost kind of save yourself. Like your ultimate salvation, I think that Poe maybe is saying, is part religion, part your own self-understanding, self-sacrifice, or your own self-determination, because the man didn't just lay there and say, please help me, someone save me. He saved himself first, and then he was saved by, quote, a higher power, the General LaSalle, which I thought was really cool. But yeah, the genius of putting he has a little bit of food and water, and he grabs the bread and puts it on the leather straps and frees himself because the rats eat it away. And then, he runs from the pit and finally gets saved. And it's very unlike Poe to have a, quote, happy ending. I was blown away as I read this a second time since high school of how meaningful this can be for one of the choices that you make in your life can help determine your future. Maybe not all of your future, but it definitely is an impact.
General LaSalle is an actual real historic figure, right?
Oh yeah, he was a real person. He got captured. I can't remember which battle it is. Like they're around in Germany somewhere like that, or in the Poland area, and he gets captured or killed. I think he gets killed, right?
Oh yeah, Battle of Wagram, right? And obviously that this is the Napoleonic Wars, right? And if we're going back to the subconscious, unconscious discussion, part of, to me, the Napoleonic discussion, well, the French Revolution discussion too, depending on, it's very questionable as to when one starts, when one begins, kind of. But you had this movement of liberty, this idea of throwing off the shackles of religion, the idea of throwing off monarchies in a sense. I think Napoleon was kind of his own monarchy. I don't think they did a great job with that one, but the idea being that the people felt oppressed and they were throwing off the shackles, in the same sense that this man is throwing off perhaps the shackles of religion in a sense for some type of earthly reward. I think he's repressed his unconscious mind, his sins of the past, and it's torturing him. It's literally the guilt that he's feeling. But rather than waiting for like that religious experience, to me, he's freed by General LaSalle, by the French Revolution, perhaps, with the idea of throwing off the shackles of needing to wait for religion or needing to wait for a higher power. It doesn't have to be religion to save you, that the power became more into the people's hands in a sense. And that's what this man needed. Like he needed to realize that he could take his own future into his own effect. He had to tackle his own demons of the past for the sins that he's created and buried in his subconscious almost.
It's really cool how this story, it literally is the pendulum. And I know that part of the story gets a lot more play because it is more of the highlight than the pit. And I think the pit is a little bit more obvious, but pendulum is, the device that's swinging back and forth. And this story feels like it just swings back and forth as the narrator, he has his faculties at one moment, I feel like, and then he kind of loses them as he's going in and out of consciousness and knowing and not knowing. And I feel like it's a perfect allegory for our lives. Sometimes we feel like our lives, we know exactly what's going on, and we have our job worked out. We know what's going on with our family. We have our hobbies. Everything is perfectly in line. And then there's other parts of your life or other times in your life where everything's a mess and you have no clue what's going on. And it feels like rats are at your throat eating on you. The walls are closing in. You get that anxiety in your heart beating, and then it's okay again. And I think that it is really perfect analogy for how our lives go sometimes, that they swing back and forth, and there's always that pit looming on the side. It is another masterfully crafted story by Poe.
Believe it or not, this is actually our 9th Poe Talk. Playlist down below if you don't believe me.
I believe you.
All right, my name is Ben Una. Thank you for spending some time with us. Let us know what your thoughts are on this story. Did you have a different interpretation? Let us know in the comments down below. Peace out.
Peace.